The last transmission from Kepler's Hope was a scream cut off mid-word. Commander Elena Voss heard it 3 times before she ordered the recording stopped. It wasn't the scream that unsettled her most. It was the silence that came after. No static, no emergency beacon, just a dead channel where 40,000 people used to be. She stood on the bridge of the Meridian, her reflection ghosted faintly in the forward viewport, watching the stars slide past as the ship dropped out of superluminal drive. Kepler's Hope should have been visible by now, its orbital ring catching starlight the way it always did. Instead, there was nothing but a smear of debris where a colony used to orbit. "Confirm sensor readings," Voss said, her voice steady even though her stomach had gone cold. "Confirmed, Commander." Lieutenant Ilya Rasmussen didn't look up from his console. "Colony structure is gone. Orbital ring fragmented. I'm reading debris signatures consistent with total structural collapse, not decompression. Something tore that station apart." "Life signs?" A pause. Too long. "None, ma'am. Not from the ring." Voss closed her eyes for half a second, long enough to remember that her cousin's family had transferred to Kepler's Hope 8 months ago, long enough to force the grief down where it couldn't touch her judgment. Then she opened them again and became once more only a commander. "Take us in. Slow approach, full shields. I want eyes on that surface." The Meridian descended through the debris field like a diver entering wreckage-choked water. Twisted metal drifted past the viewport, catching the light in ways that made Voss think, absurdly, of shattered glass ornaments. Somewhere down there had been schools, hospitals, a market square her cousin had described in a letter, full of fresh bread and children chasing each other between stalls. Now it was silence and debris and a slowly tumbling piece of hull plating with the colony's seal still visible, scorched but intact. "Commander," Rasmussen's voice had changed, sharper. "I'm reading a structure on the surface, partial. Looks like it survived the collapse." "Show me." The image resolved on the main screen, a single wing of the colony's medical center, somehow still standing amid a debris field that should have crushed it. Voss stared at it for a long moment. "That shouldn't be intact," she said quietly. "No, ma'am. It shouldn't." "Get a shuttle ready. I'm going down." The medical wing smelled like burnt insulation and something worse underneath it, something Voss refused to name even in her own head. She moved through the corridor with her sidearm drawn, though there was nothing left alive to shoot. Emergency lighting flickered along the walls, casting long red shadows that made every doorway look like a mouth. Sergeant Talia Okoro walked point, her rifle sweeping corners with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this too many times before. Behind her, 2 more Marines checked side rooms, calling out clear after clear after clear. Then Okoro stopped. "Commander, you need to see this." Voss stepped past her into what had once been a pediatric ward. The beds were overturned, the walls scorched black in patterns that curved and branched like frozen lightning. Not the blast damage of conventional weapons, but something stranger, something that had burned through matter in ways Voss had never seen in 12 years of service. And in the corner, wedged between a collapsed cabinet and the wall, a child was staring at her with eyes that didn't seem to see her at all. "Get a medic," Voss said, already moving. "Now." The girl couldn't have been older than 8. She was clutching something to her chest with both arms, so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. And when Voss knelt in front of her and gently tried to see what it was, the girl flinched back with a violence that startled everyone in the room. "It's all right," Voss said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to take it. Okay?" The girl's eyes finally focused, found Voss's face, and something in them cracked open. She didn't speak. She just held on tighter to the object in her arms and began silently to shake. Voss looked at what the girl was holding, and for the second time that day her stomach turned cold. It was not colony equipment. It was not anything from any manifest, any supply list, any piece of technology Voss recognized from 12 years of service across 3 sectors of human space. It was a smooth, dark ovoid, unmarked, unmoving, and yet somehow Voss had the powerful, irrational sense that it was watching her. "Commander." Rasmussen's voice crackled through her earpiece, tight with urgency. You need to get back to the ship. Now. What is it? Long-range sensors just picked up a fleet signature. Bearing 317 retreating at high velocity. 6 vessels, configuration unknown. They're leaving the system. Voss stood, lifting the girl carefully into her arms despite the child's rigid resistance. Then let them leave. We have a survivor and unidentified technology. That's priority. Commander, that's not... A burst of static cut through the channel. That's not what I mean. They've stopped retreating. They're turning around. The cold in Voss's stomach became something sharper, something with teeth. Get the shuttle in the air, she snapped, already running. The girl clutched against her chest. The strange dark object pressed between them like a held breath. Everyone, fall back to the shuttle now. They burst out of the medical wing into open air thick with drifting ash, the shuttle already powering up 50 meters away, its landing lights cutting through the gray haze. Okoro and the Marines sprinted alongside her, weapons still raised, though there was no enemy in sight. Not yet. Commander, I have a visual, Rasmussen said. And now there was real fear in his voice, a fear Voss had never heard from him before. 6 ships. They're not human configuration, not anything in our database. They're coming in fast. Voss reached the shuttle ramp and shoved the girl into Okoro's arms, turning to look up at the sky one last time before the ramp sealed. For a moment she saw them, 6 dark shapes descending through the debris field, their hulls catching the starlight in a way that made them look less like ships and more like something alive, something predatory. Get us out of here, she shouted. And the ramp closed and the shuttle screamed upward through the wreckage of a colony that had held 40,000 people 3 days ago. They broke atmosphere just as the Meridian's comms officer screamed a warning over the open channel. Weapons fire incoming, brace for impact. And the whole ship lurched sideways as something struck their shields with a force that threw Voss from her seat. Through the shuttle's viewport, she caught one last glimpse of the 6 alien vessels forming up in perfect formation, their weapons charging with a light that had no business existing in known physics. They had not come to finish destroying a dead colony. They had come back for the girl. The Meridian shuddered like a wounded animal, alarms screaming through every deck as Voss pulled herself up from the floor of the shuttle bay. Status, she barked into her comm, tasting blood where she'd bitten her cheek in the fall. Shields at 40% and dropping, Rasmussen's voice crackled back. They're not firing conventional weapons, Commander. Whatever that is, it's eating through our shielding like it isn't there. Voss ran for the bridge, Okoro close behind her, the girl still cradled against the sergeant's chest with the dark ovoid object clutched between them. On the main screen, the 6 alien vessels moved with a coordination that made Voss's blood run cold. Not the chaotic scatter of raiders, but the disciplined formation of a trained war fleet. Helm, get us to the jump point, Voss ordered, dropping into her chair. Rasmussen, I want everything we have on those ships. Configuration, weapon signatures, anything. Working on it, but Commander... He hesitated. I don't think we're going to outrun them. Their acceleration curve is nothing like ours. The ship rocked again, harder this time, and somewhere below decks Voss heard the groan of stressed metal. A damage report scrolled across her console. Hull breach on deck 6, casualties unknown, engine 2 running at 60%. Then we don't run, Voss said, standing, forcing steel into her voice even as fear clawed at the inside of her chest. Rasmussen, feed Helm a firing solution on the lead ship. Everyone else, brace for evasive maneuvers. The Meridian twisted through space like something alive, weapons batteries firing in staggered bursts as Voss watched the tactical display with a focus so total it blocked out everything else. The girl behind her, the blood in her mouth, the growing certainty that they were not going to survive this encounter. Then, as suddenly as it began, the alien fleet broke off. They're disengaging, Rasmussen said, disbelief plain in his voice. Commander, they're retreating again. Voss didn't trust it. She kept the ship at battle stations for a full 10 minutes after the last alien signature vanished from their sensors, watching the empty space where 6 warships had been, waiting for the trick to reveal itself. It never did. "Get us to the jump point," she finally said. "I want a priority transmission to Earth Command the second we're clear. Full sensor logs, full combat data, everything." Admiral Marcus Cade had not slept in 31 hours by the time the Meridian's transmission reached Earth Command, and he suspected he would not sleep again for a long time after reading it. He stood in the observation deck of Command Station Prime, high above the Atlantic, watching the data scroll past on the holo display in front of him. Colony destroyed. Unknown fleet. Weapon signatures that matched nothing in 3 centuries of recorded human conflict. And a survivor, a child, found clutching a piece of technology that predated human spaceflight by a margin that made no logical sense. "Talk to me," Cade said without turning around as his aide, Captain Reyes, stepped onto the deck behind him. "Preliminary analysis says the shield generators at Kepler's Hope were sabotaged from the inside, sir. Whoever attacked that colony had help. Someone on the ground disabled the defense grid roughly 6 minutes before the first strike." Cade's jaw tightened. An inside man. That's the working theory. And the artifact? Xenolinguistics is requesting immediate access. Dr. Amara Chen specifically. She says the material composition doesn't match anything in our databases, alien or otherwise. Cade finally turned, and Reyes saw in his eyes something that unsettled her more than any report could have. Not fear exactly, but the particular weariness of a man who had spent decades preparing for a war he'd hoped would never come, and who now suspected that hope had been wasted. "Get her whatever she needs," Cade said. "And Reyes, find out who sabotaged that colony. I want a name." Dr. Amara Chen had spent 15 years studying dead languages on dead worlds, and in all that time, nothing had ever made the hair on her arms stand up the way this object did. It sat on the examination table in the secure lab beneath Command Station Prime, unmoving, unmarked, radiating a faint warmth that her instruments couldn't explain. The girl, no one had gotten a name from her yet, she hadn't spoken a word since the rescue, sat in the observation room beyond the glass, watching Chen work with an intensity that made the scientist deeply uncomfortable. "Run the scan again," Chen said to her assistant, not looking away from the readouts. Full spectrum this time. The device blinked and hummed to life, and for the first time since it had arrived in the lab, the dark ovoid responded. A soft light bloomed along its surface, resolving into patterns, not random, not decorative, but structured in a way that made Chen's pulse quicken. "That's language," she whispered. "That's actual language." "Dr. Chen." Her assistant's voice had gone tight. "You need to see the observation room." Chen turned, and through the glass she saw the girl standing now, pressed against the barrier, one small hand flat against the window, staring directly at the artifact with an expression that had nothing to do with an 8-year-old's fear. The girl's lips moved. No sound came out, but Chen, trained across a dozen dead and dying languages, recognized the shape of the words even in silence. She was reading it. "Get me a linguistic recorder in there," Chen said, already moving toward the observation room door. "Now, I think she can understand this." It took another hour of patient, careful coaxing before the girl spoke aloud. Her first words since the rescue, delivered in a voice too flat and too old for a child her age. "They didn't come for the colony," she said, staring at the artifact through the glass. "They came for this. They came to stop it from waking up." Chen felt her mouth go dry. "Stop what from waking up, sweetheart? What is it?" The girl turned, and for the first time, looked directly at Chen with eyes that seemed, for just a moment, far older than they should have been. "A message," she said, "for humanity, from someone who knew this day was coming." Behind them, the artifact's light patterns shifted, brightened, and began, slowly, deliberately, to spell out a single word in a language that had never existed anywhere in recorded human history, and yet which every person in that room somehow understood without translation. "Remember." And then every light in the facility went out at once, and the emergency klaxons began to scream. The lights returned after 11 seconds, but nothing else about Command Station Prime felt the same afterward. Chen found herself on the floor of the observation room, ears ringing. The artifact's warm light still burned into her vision like an afterimage. Beside her, the girl stood perfectly still, unshaken by the blackout, staring at the now dark object as though she were waiting for it to speak again. "What happened?" Chen managed, pulling herself upright. "Power surge across the entire station," her assistant answered from the doorway, pale-faced. "Every system, every deck. Engineering says it originated from this lab." Chen looked at the artifact. It sat inert now, giving no indication that moments ago it had shut down an entire orbital command station with nothing more than a single word. "It's not just a message," she said slowly. "It's active. It's doing something to us." Word of the incident reached Admiral Cade within minutes, and within the hour, he stood in the same lab, studying the artifact with the flat, assessing stare of a man who had learned long ago not to let his face show what he was thinking. "Dr. Chen, explain this to me like I'm not a scientist." "It's a data construct," Chen said. "Not technology in the way we understand it, more like a container built to survive anything. Radiation, vacuum, catastrophic destruction. It was built to last, Admiral, built to be found. And the material—" She hesitated. "The material dating suggests it's over 10,000 years old." Cade's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "That's not possible. Humanity didn't have spaceflight 10,000 years ago." "No," Chen agreed. "We didn't, but someone knew we would." 3 days later, Voss stood in a war room 3 levels below Command Station Prime's surface, watching Cade address a room full of officers, diplomats, and allied representatives, with the calm authority of a man delivering news he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his own head and never wanted to say out loud. "Kepler's hope was not a random raid," Cade said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. "The colony was sabotaged from within before the attack began. That means someone with security clearance, someone we trusted, gave the Valkyr Ascendancy the access they needed." A murmur rippled through the room. Voss kept her eyes on Cade, arms crossed, watching the way his gaze moved across the assembled officers like he was searching for something in their faces. "In the meantime," Cade continued, "Earth Command is accelerating fleet production across all shipyards, effective immediately. That got the room's attention in a way the sabotage revelation hadn't." An Alarian ambassador near the front rose halfway from his seat. "Admiral, with respect, Earth's shipyards have been running at elevated capacity for over a decade. Every Allied intelligence office has noted it and assumed it was simple caution. Are you now telling us it was something else?" Cade held the ambassador's gaze for a long moment. "I'm telling you that humanity has spent 40 years preparing for a threat we couldn't name. We're not going to apologize for that preparation now that the threat has a face." Voss watched the room absorb that, watched Allied officers who had spent decades quietly dismissing humanity as a young, cautious, faintly nervous species reassess everything they thought they knew in real time. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt heavy, like the weight of something enormous finally settling onto her shoulders. After the briefing, she caught Cade alone in the corridor outside the war room. "Admiral, I want back on active deployment." Cade studied her with the tired, searching look of a man who had read every word of the Meridian's combat logs and understood exactly what she was asking for. "Your ship took serious damage, Commander. You're still cleared for medical leave." "I don't want leave. I want to find whoever sabotaged that colony, and I want to be there when we hit back." Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word, and she hated herself for it. "I had family on Kepler's Hope, Admiral. I need to do something with that." Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once. "Report to Dr. Chen's lab in the morning. There's something you need to see first." Chen had made progress in the 3 days since the blackout. Slow, careful progress, decoding fragments of the artifact's language one painstaking symbol at a time, with the girl's occasional cryptic assistance. What she'd found had kept her awake far longer than was healthy. The attack on Kepler's Hope wasn't about conquest, Chen explained to Voss and Cade, gesturing at a wall of translated fragments. The Valkyr didn't want the colony. They wanted to destroy this before we found it, before we understood what it meant. Which is? Voss asked. I don't know yet. Not fully. But there's a phrase that keeps recurring. Something like, the ones who came before chose humanity. Chose us for something. And whatever that something is, the Valkyr were willing to slaughter 40,000 people to make sure we never learned it. Voss felt something cold settle in her chest. An echo of the fear she'd felt watching those 6 alien ships descend through Kepler's Hope's wreckage. Chosen for what? Chen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the girl, who sat quietly in the corner of the lab, watching the artifact with the same unnerving stillness she always did. I think she knows, Chen said quietly. I think it told her, in that blackout. I think it's been telling her ever since. Before anyone could respond, the alarms began to scream again. Not the low building hum of a system malfunction, but the sharp, urgent shriek of a security breach. Cade's comm crackled instantly with a report that made his face go pale for the first time since Voss had met him. Admiral, this is perimeter defense. We have hostile contacts inside the station. Multiple casualties reported on levels 3 and 4. They're headed for the sub-levels. Voss's hand went to her sidearm on pure instinct. They're headed here. Cade was already moving toward the door, shouting orders into his comm. But Voss's eyes stayed locked on Chen, on the girl, on the artifact sitting silent and ancient on the examination table. Whatever secret it held, someone was willing to burn down the Heart of Earth Command to keep it buried. And they were already inside the walls. The first shot came through the lab's reinforced door before anyone had time to reach it. Voss shoved Chen and the girl behind the examination table as the door buckled inward, sparks screaming off its hinges. Cade was already moving, sidearm drawn, his decades of field experience surfacing beneath the calm exterior of a career admiral. Behind the table, stay down, Voss barked, positioning herself between the breach point and the 2 civilians. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard boots in the corridor, controlled and disciplined. Not a chaotic raid, but a targeted strike team who knew exactly where they were going. The door gave way entirely and 3 armored figures poured through the smoke. Voss fired before conscious thought caught up with instinct, dropping the first attacker before he cleared the threshold. Cade took the second. The third ducked behind the doorframe, and for a moment the lab went horribly silent, except for the artifact's faint, steady hum on the table between them. Federal security override, a voice called from the corridor, distorted through a helmet's vocoder. Stand down, this facility is compromised. We're evacuating the asset. There's no override that lets you shoot your way into Command Station Prime, Cade shouted back, edging toward the doorframe. Identify yourself. Silence. Then, from behind them, a new voice, calm, familiar, and utterly wrong in that moment. Stand down, Admiral. Let them take it. Voss turned, and her blood went cold. Captain Reyes stood in the lab's rear doorway, sidearm raised, not at the intruders, but at Cade. Reyes. Cade's voice was very quiet. What is this? This is bigger than you understand, sir. Reyes's hand didn't waver. That artifact isn't a gift, it's a liability. Every day it stays in human hands, it puts every colony, every ship, every person on Earth at greater risk. I'm trying to save lives. By selling us out to the people who murdered 40,000 of them? Voss's voice shook with a fury she didn't bother to hide. The Valkyr aren't the real threat, Reyes said, and for the first time, something like desperation cracked through her composure. They're being used just like we are. There's something bigger behind this, and the only way to stop it from destroying everything is to make sure humanity never wakes up whatever that thing is trying to tell us. Cade's expression didn't change, but his aim didn't waver either. You sabotage Kepler's hope. It wasn't a question, and Reyes didn't deny it. I gave them a narrow window. I didn't know they'd raise the whole colony. That wasn't supposed to happen. 40,000 people, Voss said, and her voice had gone terrifyingly flat. That wasn't supposed to happen. The moment stretched, brittle and dangerous, until the girl, silent through the entire confrontation, suddenly spoke, her flat, too-old voice cutting through the tension like a blade. They're not the ones you should be afraid of. Every head in the room turned toward her. She was standing now, small and unshaken amid the wreckage of the broken door, staring not at Reyes but at some middle distance none of the adults could see. "The Valkyr are afraid too," the girl said. "Someone told them humanity would destroy the galaxy if we ever remembered what we were. Someone's been telling everyone that lie for a very long time." Reyes's composure finally broke. "It's not a lie. You don't understand what you're carrying." "I understand better than you," the girl said, and for a heartbeat her eyes seemed to shine faintly with the same light the artifact had shown in the blackout. "I've been listening to it for 3 days. You've been listening to whoever gave you your orders." Reyes's hand trembled on her weapon. Whatever internal battle was playing out behind her eyes resolved suddenly and violently. She spun toward the corridor, shouting a warning to her remaining strike team, and in the chaos that followed, Voss lunged. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, the sidearm skittering across the floor. And for several brutal seconds the two women grappled in silence, broken only by grunts of exertion and the girl's small, sharp cry of alarm. Voss finally pinned Reyes's arm, forcing a confession she didn't need out through gritted teeth. "Who gave the orders, Reyes? Who are you really working for?" Reyes laughed, a broken, humorless sound. "You'll never even see them coming. That's the whole point. That's what they've done to every species that ever climbed too high, too fast. They don't fight wars. They just make sure the fire never gets lit." Before Voss could press further, the lab's remaining lights flickered, and the artifact on the table flared to sudden blinding brightness. Not the soft glow from before, but a hard, urgent light that made everyone in the room flinch and shield their eyes. When Voss's vision cleared, Reyes was gone. Not fled. Gone. The space where she'd been lying now empty, as though she had simply never existed in the first place. "What did it just do?" Cade demanded, staring at the artifact with something close to fear. Chen, who had been huddled behind the table through the entire confrontation, rose slowly, her face pale as ash. "I don't think it did anything to her. I think it showed her something, and whatever she saw broke her connection to wherever she was reporting." The girl walked forward, unafraid, and laid her small hand flat against the artifact's surface. The light dimmed, softened, and the girl turned to look at Voss with an expression of quiet, unbearable grief. "They're not going to stop," she said. "Not until they've buried the truth forever. And the only way to stop them is for humanity to remember what it used to be." "Used to be?" Voss knelt in front of her, forcing gentleness into a voice still raw with adrenaline. "What does that mean? What is humanity supposed to remember?" The girl looked past her toward the artifact, toward the ancient light still pulsing faintly beneath her hand. "That we were never meant to be small," she whispered. "That someone built us to survive the end of everything. And then they hit us so well that we forgot we were ever anything but ordinary." Outside the ruined door, alarms continued to wail through the corridors of Command Station Prime. And somewhere beyond the station's hull, in the deep dark of unclaimed space, something ancient and patient finally began to stir in response. 6 weeks after Reyes vanished from a locked laboratory in front of 3 witnesses, the galaxy learned exactly what humanity had been building in the dark. Admiral Cade stood on the bridge of Earth Command's newly commissioned flagship, the Sovereign, watching 140 vessels fall into formation across the main display, more warships than humanity had ever assembled in one place in its brief history among the stars. Allied officers aboard observation platforms across 3 systems watched the same feed in stunned silence, their assumptions about the quiet, cautious human species dissolving in real time. "All fleets report ready, Admiral," his tactical officer said. "Awaiting your order." Cade thought of Kepler's hope, of 40,000 people reduced to debris and silence, of Reyes's broken confession and the girl's quiet, grieving voice describing a humanity built to survive the end of everything. "Signal the fleet," he said. "We're going to remind the galaxy why it should have been watching us more closely." Voss led the strike force personally, her new command, the heavy cruiser Reckoning, cutting through the dark toward coordinates Chen had extracted from the artifact after weeks of painstaking translation. A hidden relay station buried in the debris of a long-dead star system, unmarked on any galactic chart, protected by defenses that suggested whoever built it had never expected to be found. "Talk to me, Chen," Voss said over the comm, watching the relay station grow larger on her view screen, a structure of dark, angular architecture that seemed to swallow the starlight around it rather than reflect it. "The artifact calls it a threshold node," Chen's voice came back, tense with the effort of real-time translation. "Part of a network. As far as I can tell, it's been monitoring and suppressing species across this entire region of space for thousands of years. Any civilization that starts advancing too fast, too far, gets corrected." "Corrected how?" A pause. "Wars manufactured, resources diverted, key individuals removed or replaced, sometimes entire colonies erased quietly before anyone notices what was growing there. Voss, I think Kepler's Hope wasn't the first human colony they've hit. I think it's just the first one we noticed." Voss's hands tightened on the arms of her command chair. Around her, the Reckoning's bridge crew moved with grim efficiency, running final checks before the strike. "And the Valkyr? Puppets, convinced for generations that humanity is some kind of existential threat that has to be contained before it wakes up. I don't think they even know who's really pulling the strings." The Reckoning and its escort ships dropped out of superluminal drive at the edge of the relay station's defense perimeter, and immediately the void around them erupted into a storm of defensive fire. Automated systems, ancient but ruthlessly effective, cutting through space with a precision that had clearly been refined over millennia. "Evasive pattern Theta," Voss ordered, and the fleet scattered into a formation that looked chaotic and was anything but. Decades of doctrine built by a species that had learned to fight in the mud and blood of its own bloody history, now playing out on a galactic stage. Ships that any other fleet would have lost in the first minute of engagement wove through the defensive fire with a fluid, adaptive brutality that made even Voss's own crew fall silent in something like awe. They breached the outer defenses in 11 minutes. No Allied fleet in recorded galactic history had done it in under 30. "We're through," Voss's weapons officer reported, voice tight with disbelief. "Commander, the defenses are they're adapting to us, learning our patterns in real time." "Then don't give them a pattern to learn," Voss snapped, already feeding new firing solutions to the fleet. "Rolling advance, staggered intervals, nobody repeats a maneuver twice." It should have been impossible to coordinate on the fly. It wasn't, not for a fleet built by a species that had spent its entire violent, glorious history learning to improvise in the face of annihilation. Ship by ship, the Reckoning's strike force carved a path through defenses designed to break the will of civilizations far older and, in theory, far wiser than humanity. They reached the relay station's core 40 minutes after the engagement began. Voss led the boarding team herself, refusing every argument from her XO about the risk, driven by something she couldn't fully articulate even to herself. A need to see this through to the end with her own eyes, for the colonists of Kepler's Hope who never got the chance to see anything again. The station's interior was a maze of dark corridors lit by the same faint ancient light that had pulsed from the artifact back on Earth. And as Voss and her team advanced, that light grew stronger, warmer, until they finally emerged into a central chamber that stole the breath from every person who entered it. The walls were covered in the same symbols Chen had spent weeks decoding. But here, unfiltered, unabridged, the full scope of the message was laid bare. Voss didn't need Chen's translation to understand what she was looking at. Star charts, timelines, images of 100 different species, rising and falling, each civilization's growth carefully, deliberately stunted by the same patient, invisible hand. And at the center of it all, a chamber holding records that made Voss's blood run cold. Humanity's own history, cataloged in exhaustive detail. Not the history humanity remembered, but something older, stranger, reaching back far beyond the earliest human civilizations, to a time before recorded history, when something had shaped a struggling, fractured species on a small blue world into something built to survive the end of everything. "Oh God," Voss whispered, staring at the records. "We weren't just watched. We were made." Her comm crackled. Commander, we're reading a massive power buildup at the station's core. It's activating something. Voss barely heard the warning, still staring at the ancient records, at proof that every war, every struggle, every desperate act of survival that had shaped humanity across its entire bloody history had been, in some way, guided, cultivated, toward this exact moment. Every human aboard the Reckoning strike fleet felt it at the same instant. A wave of pressure, deep and resonant, moving through their minds like the toll of some enormous ancient bell. Voss dropped to her knees, gasping as images flooded her mind that weren't her own. Flashes of 100,000 years of human history, compressed into a single unbearable instant, and beneath it all, a question, ancient and patient, and utterly without mercy. Will you finally choose what you were made to be? The question hung in Voss's mind like a blade suspended above her throat, and for a long, terrifying moment she couldn't move. Around her, the boarding team had all collapsed to their knees, gripped by the same overwhelming pressure, the same flood of images that didn't belong to any of them individually, but seemed to belong to all of humanity at once. Voss forced her eyes open, fighting through the weight pressing down on her mind, and saw the chamber's walls pulsing with light in time, with the question echoing through her thoughts. Will you finally choose what you were made to be? No, Voss gasped, and the word came out ragged but certain. No, we're not choosing anything on your terms. The pressure in her mind didn't ease, but it shifted, as though something ancient and patient were, for the first time in 10,000 years, genuinely surprised. Back on Earth, in the secure lab beneath Command Station Prime, the girl felt it too. Felt it more clearly than anyone because she had been carrying a fragment of this ancient system inside her mind since the moment she'd first touched the artifact in the ruins of Kepler's Hope. She rose from her chair, ignoring Chen's alarmed protest, and walked to the artifact resting on its pedestal, placing both hands flat against its surface. You don't get to decide what we are, she said, her small voice carrying a weight far beyond her years. Not the threshold, not whoever built this, not anyone but us. The artifact's light flared, and for the first time since its discovery, its message shifted. Not a command, not a question, but something closer to an explanation, pouring into the girl's mind with a clarity that made her gasp and grip the pedestal to stay upright. It hadn't been built by the threshold at all. It had been built to fight them. 10,000 years ago in ancient civilization, one of the first to rise fast enough, far enough to threaten the threshold's quiet, endless suppression of the galaxy, had been utterly destroyed for the crime of growing too strong. In their final days, knowing they could not survive, they had done the only thing left to them. They scattered seeds across 100 worlds, genetic and cultural inheritances buried deep in the DNA and instincts of struggling primitive species, hoping that somewhere, someday, one of them would rise again strong enough to finish what they'd started. Humanity was not a weapon built by the threshold. Humanity was the last surviving legacy of the people the threshold had tried, and failed, to completely erase. The artifact wasn't a leash. It was a gift, a choice deliberately left for whichever descendant species finally found it. The freedom to accept an inheritance of struggle and survival, or to walk away from it entirely and remain exactly what they already were. At the relay station, Voss felt the shift in the pressure around her mind the instant the girl understood the truth. Half a galaxy away, some ancient resonant link between the artifact and its source flaring bright enough that even Voss, untrained and overwhelmed, caught fragments of it. She understood in that moment why humanity had always fought so hard to survive against odds that should have broken lesser civilizations. Not because they'd been built for war, because somewhere in their blood, in their bones, in the stubborn, defiant will that had carried them from a single fractured world to the edge of the stars, they had never stopped being the descendants of a people who refused to disappear quietly. We didn't need you to make that choice for us, Voss said aloud, to the ancient chamber, to whatever remained of the threshold's will still pulsing through the station's dying systems. We already made it. Every single day we survived, we made it. The chamber's light dimmed, and the pressure in every human mind aboard the Reckoning finally released all at once, leaving behind only exhaustion and a strange, aching clarity. The Threshold's control network did not fall in a single dramatic battle. It fell over the following weeks, node by node, as human fleets, joined now by allied ships whose crews had watched Terran tactics shatter defenses no one else had ever managed to breach, and who wanted, for the first time in generations, to stand beside humanity rather than merely tolerate it, hunted down and dismantled the hidden relay stations scattered across a dozen systems. The Valkyr ascendancy, freed from generations of manufactured fear, once Chen's team found a way to broadcast proof of the Threshold's manipulation across their own networks, sued for peace within a month. Kate accepted the terms personally, though Voss noted he never quite managed to forgive them, not fully, not for Kepler's hope. Some wounds, he told her once over a quiet drink in the observation deck of the Sovereign, were meant to heal into something you carried rather than something you forgot. Kepler's hope was rebuilt slowly over the following year, not as a military outpost this time, but as a memorial colony. Its orbital ring redesigned to include a garden visible from space, a green ring of living memory circling the debris field where 40,000 people had once lived. Voss stood in that garden on the day of its dedication, the girl beside her, no longer nameless, having finally chosen to be called Mira, after a grandmother lost in the very colony that had taken her whole world away. She was older now, steadier, though something ancient still lingered behind her eyes on quiet days. "Do you regret it?" Mira asked, looking out over the garden. "Knowing what we really are now?" Voss considered the question seriously, the way she considered every question Mira asked her these days. "No," she said finally. "I used to think humanity had something to prove to the galaxy, that we needed to earn our place among species older and stronger than us." She looked out at the garden, at the quiet, growing green of something new rising from unbearable loss. "But we already earned it. A long time before any of this started. Every time we chose to keep going instead of giving up. Every time we survived something that should have ended us." Mira slipped her hand into Voss's, small and warm, achingly ordinary despite everything extraordinary she carried inside her. "The Threshold thought they could erase us," she said. "That they could make sure the fire never lit." "They were wrong," Voss said, watching the light of a rising sun catch the garden's new leaves, watching a galaxy slowly, finally, learn to see humanity clearly for the first time. The fire was never something they could control. It was ours. It was always ours. Above them, in the quiet dark beyond the atmosphere, the reconstructed orbital ring of Kepler's hope turned slowly against the stars, no longer a wound, but a promise, carried forward by a species that had finally stopped asking the galaxy for permission to be exactly what it had always been, unbreakable, unbowed, and at long last unafraid.